This is the Chapter 3 Stigma Podcast. This podcast was created to be there for any individual who feels like they are at a low point in life and are confused, seemingly alone, and helpless in their situation. I am a recovering alcoholic, and I felt this way too, until I sat across the table from another addict who shared his story and made me realize that I was not alone in my struggles. My life was saved by this realization, and I hope to help anyone struggling by sharing my story to show you that you are not alone and that life can contain unbelievable riches and meaning. Welcome. I am glad you are here. Hey folks, welcome to another episode of the Chapter 3 Stigma Podcast. So in the last few podcasts, we've been discussing and going through some key exercises and learnings and just kind of summarizing the overall programming of my experience in intensive inpatient rehab, just to kind of paint a picture of what the entry into recovery looks like from that perspective. To wrap the series up, I actually wanted to discuss more so what it looks like and what it means when someone talks about working a program or being in a program as it pertains to recovery. And I think the best way to jumpstart that topic and to really dive into it is to actually look at the final exercise that I did prior to leaving rehab. And this is something that took me probably 5 to 7 days to really sit down and think through and put together. And it is what's called a discharge plan. And reflecting back on it, I think this is one of the most imperative aspects if you choose to go into intensive inpatient rehab. And it's a perspective that you need to take, and I've mentioned it before, but rehab will never solve your problem with addiction or alcoholism. It merely provides you with the opportunity to reset, reassess, and realign yourself. And in going through this discharge plan, what it allowed me to do and what it allowed others to do who took it seriously was to set themselves up for the hours and the days and the weeks and the months after leaving intensive inpatient rehab. Again, in the four walls of rehab, it's a safe bubble. There is little to zero risk. And so I, again, had some fear as I approached my departure from rehab. And this discharge plan really allowed me to write things down when I was in a clear state of mind, an unemotional state of mind with how I was going to handle myself when I engaged and was working to reintegrate with the world outside of rehab. So what I'm going to do here is go through what I've written down in my discharge plan, and then to wrap up, discuss how my plan has maintained me in my day-to-day and week-to-week programming, but and influenced that, but also changed from the time that I left. So this plan, again, is a sheet that we were given and that we filled out, and so you will hear some paper in the background, I'm sure, as I work through the key components of this. And so the discharge plan starts off, first and foremost, state the reason that you chose recovery. And what I put down was feelings of a loss of self and a loss of overall self-care and self-love, and wanting to get that back. Following up, it's asked, when will you complete your residential treatment? And subsequently, what is your aftercare plan? It asks you, I am committed to do the following, and then prompts you to circle what you're doing. And the list is PHP or IOP, which we have covered as aftercare alternatives that folks can enter into, individual therapy, couples therapy, family therapy, sober living, psychiatrists, 12-step meetings. So my response is all complete on the 12th of June, 23. In my aftercare plan, I circled PHP, couples therapy, and 12-step meetings. The couples therapy aspect was obviously something Alyssa and I discussed in detail and intensively, and just given the way that my alcoholism manifested, we knew that we had healing to do on the front of our relationship. And again, we didn't know how imperative this was going to become as we entered into the struggles and the sufferings that we did with Lucy's story. So following up, the next prompt, and I really want to highlight this because it really is key. You hear all of these statistics about relapse in rehab, and right up front in the discharge plan, it asks, or it states, knowing that my first 72 hours after completion of treatment has the highest risk of relapse, I will be with blank and engaged in blank. So who will you be with and what activities will you be doing? I listed the people I was going to be with were specifically Alyssa, Grant, and individuals from the program, meaning AA as well as PHP. And I will be engaged in PHP and AA meetings. So I've detailed this before, but leaving rehab, I walked out the doors at 5:45 a.m. on Monday, June 12th. At 9 a.m., my ass was in a seat at PHP that very day. And so I jumped right into it. I wanted no breaks. In the days and weeks after leaving, when I would wrap up PHP sessions, I would oftentimes search out and shop around and go to various AA meetings, never more than one a day, but I was following up PHP with AA meetings, especially early on after leaving rehab. Then the follow-up after that, my first weekend home, I have plans to, and I wrote down celebrate our 5th wedding anniversary. I wanted to specifically FaceTime with all family, in-laws, my own family, and others. I wanted to do a drive and hike out in the mountains with Alyssa and Grant, and I wanted to celebrate Father's Day, but also Mother's Day, because as I've stated before, Mother's Day was actually the day that we decided that I was going to go in to North Point. So wanted to do a dual celebration with Alyssa. They ask about, will you look into sober living? I just said, I'm going to pass. I have a home. And then my living arrangements after completion include my response going back home to Boise. Next prompt. At this living arrangement, I have established the following boundaries to help promote my recovery. My responses: no alcohol in the house or on property. Next one, I want to be in bed by 10 p.m. I want to plan for the weekend by Thursday evening. So my alone time and unstructured time leading up to going into rehab created a lot of chaos and issues, and I would fill it by drinking. So I knew early on that, and I didn't want it always to be this way, but I knew I had to be disciplined with it up front. I had to plan for the weekend in this empty time before the weekend actually hit. So Thursday evening, weekend plans was my deadline. And then finally, and this one might seem small and trivial, but I wanted to empty cabinets of drinkware and drink accessories like koozies and things like that. I'll get into a little more detail as to why a little later. Next question. My plan B for living arrangements, if my plan A doesn't work out, includes, and my response, check back into North Point. This is actually something I put a lot of thought into when I was writing this out. And I chatted extensively about it with a buddy of mine, and we both, who also had a house and a wife here in the Boise area, and we both agreed that our only situation where our living situation didn't work out was one in which we needed to come back. And honestly, both of us could not fathom that as a reality. And both of us to this day have maintained ourselves on the road to recovery since we left. Next prompt: goals that are important to support my recovery are, and then in parentheses it says, be smart with your goals. SMART being the acronym: specific, measurable, achievable, reasonable, and time sensitive. And I'm not going to go through each and every one of these. I'm just going to highlight them. But the categories for the goals are as follows: physical, emotional, spiritual, vocational, aka occupation, social, environmental, meaning your home, things like that, intellectual, and then financial. And so just to highlight a few of the ones that I called out, and it was fairly extensive, and honestly, like, I didn't stick to all of these goals. As I left rehab, I prioritized things. I was very deliberate about prioritizing the things that were most important to maintaining me on the road of recovery. And so these goals did shift some. But the physical one was I wanted to move every single day. On the emotional front, it was completing a marriage devotional that Alyssa and I had started together. Spiritual, I wanted to get more consistent about attending Sunday church services. Vocational, I have two things, and I'm actually going to dive into the occupation side of this discharge plan because I think it imparts a pretty key lesson, and I had a pretty big awakening on this front as I moved through my time in rehab and filled this discharge plan out. But my vocational goals were continue my job search in the Boise market, and also, and this is probably the most important goal that I left, I was going to leave my job if after 6 weeks I felt like I was not handling the stress or I was feeling triggered to drink by my job. Up to this point, my job had been the biggest excuse, the biggest reason, the biggest stressor that I went to alcohol. And quite frankly, I just flat out did not like my job. I did not like my manager, did not like my team. And so I set a rule for myself that I did not communicate to anyone at work until after the time had elapsed. But I was going to quit, no questions asked, if after 6 weeks I wasn't feeling like my mental state was in a sufficient spot to maintain recovery with the current job that I had. So that is a theme I'm going to continue to bring up throughout this because I think it's an important one to draw out just how crafting up boundaries and creating a recovery plan or program actually works. On the social front, one thing I called out was plan a night with friends one time per month. I've mentioned this before, but Alyssa and my social life had disintegrated due to my alcoholism. And I knew I really had the drive, and we had loving friends here in the area whose relationships we wanted to deepen and strengthen. Environmental, I called out move my office. We had created a new space in the house over the previous months, and I knew that I needed to change my office scene from the one that I was in our second and guest bedroom. So move the office, and then also plan our first camping trip with Grant. And this one was important to me because it was something that we always talked about and we always pushed off. And introducing Grant to the outdoors and the mountains was just so important to me and to us. And so this was a key goal that I wanted to do within the first few weeks. And finally, and this might be a very minuscule seeming goal, but I wanted to clean our basement. The basement is where I hid my empties. The basement is where I physically retreated to when I was in the throes of despair and going through the symptoms of detox. And I viewed that space as a space of darkness, deceit, and lies. And I figured that a physical cleansing of that space would help me emotionally and spiritually. And in the oddest way, it absolutely did. Of course, like any, I think, standard American, we are a year and a half after this initial basement cleaning, and it has cluttered up again. And so it's on the docket to do in the coming few weekends. Moving on intellectually, this one for me, I just said get into the AA book, the Alcoholics Anonymous book. Financial, this is a key outcome of rehab. And again, because I was controlling our finances and hiding and shifting around funds to mask how much money I was spending on alcohol. I decided that Alyssa and I were going to sit down every single Friday and just go through our finances, line by line. And I knew this was something that was needed to build trust in both of us throughout this process. And quite honestly, this practice actually fell away much quicker than I thought it would. I thought this was something that we would establish and maintain and continue doing for months and months on end. But relatively quickly, and I think in a large part accelerated because of our learnings about Lucy, this one dropped away. But it was a signal to me that things were changing and that trust, although extremely slowly, was coming back in various areas of my life or of our life. Next question, what types of meetings will you attend? And the options here are Alcoholics Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous, Celebrate Recovery, and Dharma Recovery. And so I obviously talk extensively about AA because it is the programming that I have chosen and that resonates with me. But as you can see, and as a rehab facility obviously knows, there are many options, and the individual needs to figure out the one that works for them. If you want to set yourself up for relapse after rehab, like high probability, extreme risk, don't do any programming is all I'll say. Next question. I am committed to blank meetings per week. I put 2 to 3, and that is actually a number I've continued to maintain up to this point. Honestly, it has probably shifted to 0 to 2 meetings each week. But anyway, still right in that ballpark. And then next question, my plans for finding a temporary sponsor. So this is something someone that would guide you through the steps of whatever program that you entered into. My response, it was in the works. I didn't have a sponsor at that point. Talked about it a little, but I went to my first morning meeting at the group and at the session or place that has now become my routine go-to. And there was someone there that heard and saw that I was new, and they walked up to me and they go, "My bet is that you need a sponsor." And I said, "Why, yes, that would be the case." And they pointed someone out across the room and said, "Go talk to him." And so that's how I wound up with a sponsor in the 1 week after leaving rehab. Next question. The consequences of not attending meetings would be, and my response was complacency and relapse. Complacency was something I was very concerned about and aware of. Just the fact that as a human being, we have a tendency to forget about and downplay past sufferings. And so I was intensely concerned about complacency coming in and getting the thought pattern back where it's like, well, this time will be different. I can handle my alcohol now. And so I was willing to do anything to avoid falling into those thought patterns again. Next question. My support people include, and then in parentheses it asks, what level of sobriety are they at? And what I've done is listed out, or what I did was listed out my 3 closest friends from rehab, noted that they were in early stages of recovery. I called out Alyssa, my wife, And her level of sobriety, I put very in control of drinking. And my extended family, so that's in-laws and my immediate family. And I also identified there, all of them are very in control of their drinking. Next question, what do I need from my primary support people? How do I want them to show up for me going forward? And what I wrote, hold me accountable for my goals and for my communication goals. Ask and be honest about let me back up. Ask about and be honest about any cravings or urges that I have for alcohol. Ask about how AA meetings are going. And then finally, don't feel like they have to hide this from the outside world. Next question, who or what do I need to set boundaries with? And this whole section is about boundaries. So I am actually going to jump ahead to the next few prompts and then talk through some of the key boundaries that I detailed. So the next prompt is, what are these boundaries? The prompt following is, how will I set them? And so going back, one of the key boundaries I set, I'm gonna name two of them here. The first one might be seem ridiculous at the outset, but just let me talk through the remainder of the prompt. So the first boundary that I needed to set was with the grocery store. So what were these boundaries in particular? I was not going to do any of our grocery shopping for the first month. If I had to put in a grocery order, it was going to be done via the local store's drive up and go. I was not going to enter into a grocery store. Once that 1 month has passed, I was going to go only to a particular grocery store that had the alcohol section more so hidden in the back corner. So one that I did not need to pass on my grocery run. And finally, I was going to keep receipts from every single grocery run that I wound up doing so that we could check them against the charges when Alyssa and I sat down to do our weekly financial review. And this might seem absolutely ridiculous at the outset, but for me and in my situation, this is how I was creating chaos and confusion and hiding things and lying, was how I shifted things around with the grocery store and with various stores that I purchased alcohol from. So I knew I needed to do anything possible to be as transparent on that front as I could. Finally, how will I set these boundaries? I said it already. I kind of jumped ahead, but really the weekly financial review with Alyssa was my way of maintaining boundaries in that front. I also want to talk about the boundaries that I set with work, because while work was a key excuse, it was a genuine stressor and trigger for me. And so what are these boundaries that I set with work? I set my work day. I am primarily engaging with people on the East Coast. So I'm working pretty early in the morning, but I declared that my start time was going to be 7:30, and that if I needed to attend a recovery or AA meeting, that takes priority over any work meeting. Now, I was able to entirely avoid any situation where I had to drop work in the middle of the day and go to a meeting. But what this boundary allowed me to do was be consistent in attending my early morning AA meeting, where I was able to get back home by 7:30 and get started. And then the next prompt, how will I set these boundaries? Communicate with my boss and with my team. And so I just flat out stated my expected start time. And I noted that when I was at these meetings, I was largely going to be unreachable until I got done and got back. The other boundary that I set with work, I discussed previously, but I set a 6-week check-in for myself. And my rule was that if I had experienced significant triggers or intense amounts of stress that I felt like was unmanageable for a long time, I was ready to quit. Just walk away from work, even if I did not have another job lined up at the time. Sacrificing a few uncomfortable weeks and months of unemployment was worth way more to me than sacrificing my ability to stay in recovery. The next question is, what recovery-related activities will I engage in? So AA was a huge one for me. Also called out my aftercare PHP. Next prompt, what service work, if any, do I plan on engaging in after completion? And this service work question is really one to start pushing people to engage in activities that are above and beyond themselves. And this is really important when it comes to maintaining your recovery, because through service, you find purpose and meaning. And so my response to this prompt was I wanted to re-engage with Isaiah, who Isaiah was a little brother that I had from the Big Brothers, Big Sisters program when we lived in Minnesota. And Isaiah and I have had a really tight relationship for nearly 12 years at this point. And so I wanted to get back in touch with him and just see how he was doing as he was progressing through his high school years. And then the next one was to volunteer for a service position once I found an AA home group. Service positions, I should say, in AA constitute like running a meeting, being a greeter at a meeting, maintaining a full coffee pot at the meeting, things as simple as that. Next prompt, what role does or will spirituality play in my recovery? And I just wrote strong. Honestly, at this time, I didn't understand and I didn't really know how strong it would wind up being, but I knew that I had the desire for it to be strong. And my big thing that I called out was I wanted to practice prayer more than anything. And again, as I've stated before, the serenity prayer is truly the bedrock for my recovery and something that I think on and reflect on and pause to practice often. Next prompt, my early warning signs of a relapse are, in my response, cravings, boredom, isolation, work issues or stress, lying, and then in parentheses, even a little lie, not getting my movement practice, my self-talk, turning on myself, cutting off from communication with family and friends. This is just imperative. As I've mentioned before, physical relapse, where your drug of choice is entering your system, is the last step in a progressive chain. And the crumbling of that chain can happen months before the physical relapse happens, or it can happen minutes or seconds before the physical relapse happens. So identifying these early warning signs are key, and they have been so helpful for me. As I detailed in a podcast entirely on emotional relapse, the ability to recognize when some of your strongholds and your defense systems have fallen or been beaten down is imperative in avoiding actually putting your substance that you abuse into your system. Next prompt, my plans to support my recovery during birthdays, sporting events, weddings, and holidays are, and just a note before I jump in, this is entirely because you would not, I was in rehab over Memorial Day weekend. We had such a huge influx of people that came in over the holiday weekend because they have one extra day without work where they can just go crazy on their drinking. And so many people hit their point of unmanageability with just one single extra day of not having to work. And these kind of out of the ordinary life events or holidays have a tendency of catching people off guard. People are loose, they're celebrating, they're with family, friends, they're having a good time, and they might feel social pressure or fear of judgment, and so give in to a craving. So anyway, my response is just be aware of who might be in attendance that is supportive of my recovery. My big thing was be honest about my recovery journey. If I'm offered a drink, maintain and set a time and maintain that time of arrival and departure from an event, and then create a nonverbal signal with Alyssa to indicate like, hey, I'm done here. Let's get going. Next prompt, my top 3 triggers are: first, feeling lost or inadequate at work; second, grocery stores; and third, hosting family and friends at our house. Next prompt that continues down this theme of triggers. My list of triggers I can continue to update includes, and then the subcategories are people, places, and things. And so for my people on the work front, it was my boss. It was another, I guess you can call him, let's call him an upper manager, because I have a hard time calling this individual an actual leader. But 2 very distinct and key people from work were a trigger. The places for me: grocery store, inside of gas stations, and the back room of the basement where I hid my drinks. The things for me: my truck and truck keys, a Yeti mug that I drank out of, and I would hide my drinking within, and then koozies. As odd as it sounds, like if I was drinking from a can, I would place it in a koozie so that I could presumably hide the fact that I was drinking alcohol. Next prompt, and we're almost there. Internal coping skills I can use when I have strong urges to use are, my response is box breathing. So box breathing, for those unfamiliar, it's 4 seconds of breath in through your nose, 4 seconds of holding your breath, 4-second exhalation, and then 4 seconds of just pause after exhalation, and then you go back to the beginning. There's a lot of studies around the benefits and impact of box breathing. Next skill is journaling, serenity prayer, meditation, and then finding a 10-minute distraction. That was actually a seemingly cheap but really effective coping skill that we were taught in rehab. Was just find something that takes your mind. Just find something that you can set a 10-minute timer with and do. And the reason for that is there are studies that indicate that like cravings and urges generally last no more than 3 minutes. Now there is, I would say, a caveat to that and a much deeper hole that I could go into when it comes to the insanity of the addict and some of the urges that can hit on that front. Not even urges, but just like intense focus and obsession. So I'll leave that for another time. Excuse me. But yes, 10-minute distraction. And I'll be honest, outside of journaling and the serenity prayer, I didn't use any of these. Again, I have genuinely not had a craving or urge since I entered into rehab. So while these were ready and available for me, I didn't need them. Next prompt, places I can go or things I can do to provide a positive distraction are, my responses, once again, journaling, go for a walk with a podcast, just rip out an exercise, pushies, and I have in parentheses, push-ups or burpees until exhaustion. Physically go to our best friend's house. They live like a mile and a half down the street. Zach has been on the podcast. He was the one that picked me up from rehab. I had a genuine plan that if I was alone and feeling intense urges or cravings and felt like I couldn't handle it, I was going to grab my keys and just drive to their house. If they were not home or if they were busy, I was just going to sit outside of their house. But I viewed it as a safe spot away from my home. Next prompt, People I can call who support my recovery are, and then list their name and number. I have a whole host of people from both rehab as well as friends from college who were aware of this situation, and then family members. Next prompt, I will make my plan accessible to my support people by sending them a copy of this document. I'm sorry, that was my response. Sending them a copy of this document. So I was going to distribute this discharge plan to friends. To my immediate family, and just have them have it to be able to hold me accountable and look back on it and check in on how things were going. And then I have shared a hard copy of this plan with the following support people. Same thing there. And then the final prompt, I will make my plan accessible to myself by, in my response, having it physically at my work desk and review it one time per week, Monday morning. I maintained this practice for probably 2 months. And it was helpful. It was helpful just to be able to glance over and know that I had a plan in place and that I had thought through this. And so it was extremely beneficial. And so again, this was my perspective as I was sitting in rehab, facing the reality that I was going to go back out and re-engage with the world. What I want to wrap up with is just how my programming has evolved and changed and where it is today. And so when someone might ask you like, well, what's the program you run? Are you in a program? Really what they mean is like, what does your day and week look like to maintain yourself in active recovery? And so as people have asked me about that, and I'll be honest, I'm a little hesitant to share this because this, if you are in the throes of your battle, this almost seems unrealistic and unattainable. And I want to recognize that because I was there. I was sitting there where you were at 1.2. But I got here through daily, consistent obsession over just the tiniest improvements. I've said it before, but I genuinely only strove for 0.01% improvement every single day in any single aspect of my life. And by taking that approach and having that obsessive focus on just small expectations, this is where I've gotten to today. My daily program involves waking up early. I journal. I utilize a journal called the Phoenix Journal. It is prompt based, but it also, the thing I love most about it is it gives you an hour by hour snapshot of a 24-hour period. And it says, what would your ideal day be? So the very first thing I'm doing that morning is writing out what would make basically an incredible day for me. And I'll be honest, at this point, my days are incredibly repetitive. They look boring from the outside looking in, but boring is like the most amazing place to be in when you have gone through what we've gone through. And so I detail my day out. I answer the few prompts, and then there is open space to just journal. And on that, I literally might write one coherent sentence at this point in the open space. When I was in rehab and really working out and flushing out everything that was going on in my head and like dealing with getting over incredible and intense anxiety, I wrote a lot more to just sort my thoughts out. But today I will write something as simple as go for it or get after it or let's do it. And that's all I write. Following that, I write for Chapter 3 Stigma, or I do work associated with Chapter 3 Stigma. And then I move. I'm generally doing some type of, say, 30 to 40 minute exercise. I know them, but I love them. The folks, I should say, at Mountain Tough have incredible programming. And I love not having to think about it, but having something new and fresh every single day that I can do and challenge myself with on the movement front. And that kicks off my day. On like a week-to-week basis, what my program looks like is I should step back. On the daily front, I truly am in bed by 10 p.m. every single day. I legitimately can't remember the last time I stayed up past 10 p.m. outside of maybe waking up on the couch after falling asleep, reading or watching something, and dragging my butt up to bed. On the weekly front, what my program looks like is Tuesday, Thursday mornings, I'm going to my early AA meetings. Sunday has largely become a family day between church and just activities after that. Our family dinner time is becoming incredibly important for us to all sit down at the table together and to eat our meal from start to finish as a family. And I chat with my sponsor maybe once every 2 weeks or something like that. And I love my engagement in relationship with my sponsor. Usually it's just pretty quick text messages, checking in on how each other are doing. We'll see each other at meetings every once in a while. And that's that. And then on top of it, it is just weekly conversations with friends. I have really tried to branch back out and reach back out to friends that I may not have talked to for a while. So that has become a really important part of my week. And that's it. Like I said, it's kind of gotten boring and repetitive, but boring and consistent action has been the most meaningful aspect of entering into recovery. And so that's all I've got. I think for the most part, we're kind of going to wrap up the rehab deep dive at this point. Again, I just cannot express my appreciation enough for those of you who have been following along and who have been reaching out. It's incredibly impactful and meaningful to me to know that me standing here alone and blabbing is potentially helping someone else out or connecting with someone in ways where they may have felt completely isolated and alone before. So, as I said time and time again, know that you're not alone. There is hope. There is a solution waiting out there. It just genuinely requires consistent daily action. Focus only on the day. So that's all I've got. So much love for y'all. If you enjoyed this podcast, share it with others or give us a rating on your channel of choice. My hope is that my story can help others in their struggles with addiction or any other aspects of life that they feel could be bettered. You can follow us on social media at Chapter 3 Stigma on Instagram and YouTube. I cannot solve your problems for you, but I can listen. If you want to reach out with a message through one of those channels, I will respond and let you know that you are not alone. All the best, you are loved, and life is worth every struggle and bit of suffering you have to endure. Until next time, all the best.